I said over my dead body. I have banned all the export of unprocessed minerals from here. Let them stay in the ground. When the grandchildren come, they will get them out.
And our last story today is from Malawi, which has frozen exports of precious minerals and gemstones. The Southeast African country has also decided not to issue new licenses and permits to companies.
Africa is making bold moves. One by one, countries across the continent are shutting the doors on raw material exports, choosing to keep their gold, oil, cobalt, and lithium at home to fuel local industries. From Nigeria to Zimbabwe, 10 nations have now banned or restricted exports, shaking up global supply chains and forcing the world to pay attention. But here's the big question. Is this the beginning of Africa's economic freedom, or will it spark a new wave of global tension? Stay tuned, because the list of countries will surprise you. For over a century, the economic game was brutally simple, a lopsided affair masquerading as global trade. The math was insulting. Ghanaian cocoa beans earned a farmer 5 cents. The Swiss-branded chocolate bar made from them sold for $5. Congolese cobalt, dug by hand, was sold for pocket change, only to be embedded in a German-made electric vehicle battery worth thousands. Africa shipped its raw, earth-given wealth in bulk containers, and the global north shipped back shiny, finished goods and kept the colossal margin. You could call it value addition, or use the sterile term, the resource curse. But for most people on the continent, it was simply daylight robbery on a relentless, generational repeat. This wasn't a sudden storm. It was the breaking of a century-old dam, weakened by decades of inequity. The seeds of this economic revolution weren't sown in public squares or at press conferences, but in encrypted chat rooms and discreetly vanished calendar invites. Throughout late 2024, mining and trade ministers from 10 key nations went radio silent to the outside world. Encrypted texts and secured video calls bounced between 10 capitals, from Accra to Kinshasa, Harare to Abuja. The core message was identical. If we all slam the gate on the same morning, they can't play us off each other. The strategy hinged on unity, a concept long preached but rarely practiced on such a scale. The world's supply chain managers woke up to find their dashboards blinking red. The ships were not coming. This was not a single act, but 10 hammers swinging as one, each targeting a critical artery of the Western industrial machine. First, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the undisputed king of cobalt, froze all exports of unprocessed cobalt and copper concentrates. Holding over 70% of the world's reserves, the DRC's message was blunt. The age of shipping raw earth from Katanga to be refined in China or Finland is over. If you want the element that powers every electric vehicle and smartphone battery, you must build the refineries here, in Lubumbashi, and share the technology and the profits. Next, Zimbabwe, home to Africa's largest lithium deposits, followed suit. All exports of raw lithium ore were halted. The directive was aimed squarely at the electric vehicle industry, with an implicit message to companies like Tesla and Volkswagen. Bring a battery factory to Harare, not just an empty freighter. The era of white gold being shoveled out of the ground and shipped away for a pittance was declared dead. Then came the giants of the cocoa world, Ghana and the Ivory Coast, who together supply over half of the planet's chocolate obsession. They didn't just ban raw bean exports. They mandated that a rising quota of beans must be processed locally into butter, liquor, or finished chocolate. Simultaneously, they hiked the farm gate price by 45%, ensuring the profits reached the farmers directly. This wasn't just about economics. It was about reclaiming the identity and flavor of a product that is quintessentially West African. Guinea, a quiet giant in the background, swung its hammer with startling force. As the world's second-largest producer of bauxite, the essential ore for aluminum, its decision was felt in everything from car bodies to soda cans. Conakry didn't just halt raw exports. It revoked 51 foreign mining licenses for bauxite, gold, diamonds, and graphite, citing environmental and contractual breaches. The message was clear. The old deals, signed under different terms and different governments, are null and void. A new era of partnership, not extraction, has begun. In the Sahel, Burkina Faso took control of its most precious resource, gold. The government halted all exports of unrefined gold, mandating that every ounce be processed at its new national refinery before sale. This was a direct move to gain monetary sovereignty, to know the true value of its output, and to ensure that Burkina Faso's gold bars are stamped in Ouagadougou, not Zurich. Meanwhile, Uganda targeted the future of African infrastructure. It banned the export of its high-grade iron ore, a resource it has in abundance yet has historically imported steel. The goal is explicitly regional, to build a powerful East African steel industry, supplying Ugandan, Kenyan, and Tanzanian construction projects with locally made steel, breaking the dependency on Chinese or Turkish mills. Gabon, a nation covered in precious forests, took a stand for its environment and its economy. It strengthened its existing ban on the export of raw, high-value logs. Any valuable timber, from Okel to Kevizingo, cannot leave the country without a sawmill haircut, first being processed into veneer, plywood, or furniture components. This transforms the nation from a logging camp into a manufacturing hub. Namibia's move was a masterclass in strategic timing. It joined the embargo on raw lithium and other critical minerals right as the European Union's new electric vehicle subsidies were kicking in, creating a massive demand shock. The message to the EU was pointed. Your Green Deal runs on our minerals, and the price of that access is local industrialization. Finally, Nigeria, West Africa's economic powerhouse, targeted a commodity that empowers millions of women, shea nuts. By banning the export of raw nuts, Nigeria forced international cosmetic and food companies to source processed shea butter directly from Nigerian facilities. This seemingly small move channels wealth directly into the hands of the rural cooperatives that harvest the nuts, making it one of the most socially impactful bans of all. The counter-moves from the West have been clumsy and, so far, entirely ineffective. France hastily offered the Democratic Republic of Congo 400 million euros for road rehabilitation if cobalt flows would just resume. The Congolese mining minister's reply was curt: pave the roads first, and then we can discuss the price of our refined ore. A Swiss commodity trading house tried to sue Guinea in an international tribunal, citing an old bilateral investment treaty. The Guinean government yawned, then publicly released a dossier of the traders' environmental breaches and tax shortfalls, effectively killing their legal standing. Washington scrambled to fast-track lithium mining in Argentina, only to have engineers remind them that you still need African cobalt and graphite to turn that lithium into a functional battery anode. Within Africa, local entrepreneurs and startups are surfing the shockwave. A new Congolese consortium named Cobalt Works is building a $250 million refinery with 51% local ownership, funded by a mix of state and private capital. In Ghana, two sisters who previously worked as middlemen for a large trading house launched their own bean-to-bar chocolate company and are now stocked in duty-free shops from Nairobi to Johannesburg. Uganda's largest domestic miner is now bankrolling a network of neighborhood steel fabrication shops. Zambia's commodity exchange, watching its neighbor's success, just logged record-breaking futures contracts for cobalt. Ghana's exchange announced it would list its own cocoa processing options by December. For the first time, modern factories and sophisticated capital markets are sprouting on the very same soil that once only grew raw ore. This coordinated action has sent a geopolitical tsunami through the halls of power in the West. Europe's landmark Green Deal and America's Inflation Reduction Act, both cornerstones of Western climate policy, run on the very African metals that are now being withheld. Their success is predicated on cheap, uninterrupted supply. With that supply now choked, climate diplomacy is stalling. Brussels has already floated a request for a 2-year pause on some of its EV adoption targets. In Washington, politicians are whispering about critical supply threats, a phrase once reserved for oil embargoes from enemy states. Meanwhile, China, which shrewdly began building refineries inside Africa years ago, is playing both sides. It offers African nations cheap loans and technical expertise to build more smelters, tightening its grip on both the raw materials and the processing capacity. The West now faces a stark choice: Actively finance and support African industrialization as a partner, or stand by and watch China become the ultimate gatekeeper to the green economy. The events have shattered several long-held, patronizing myths. The first of all was, Africa needs us more. It turns out Arizona doesn't have much cobalt, and Switzerland doesn't grow cocoa. The second myth was, the farmers will suffer from this disruption. Ghana and Ivory Coast immediately raised the guaranteed farm gate price for cocoa by 45%, directly enriching the farmers. The third myth was, this kind of resource nationalism always leads to corruption. In a radical act of transparency, Guinea posted the full financial and environmental audits of the 51 revoked licenses online for public scrutiny. Accountability is rising, not falling. What happens next will be even more transformative. Observers are now watching the refinery race, which countries can build processing capacity fastest. There is serious talk of a new gold-backed West African currency, a move that would challenge the dominance of the dollar and euro in regional trade. And all eyes are on the development of the first African commodity exchanges that price these critical materials in local currencies, not dollars. If any of these next-level dominoes fall before 2027, today's export bans will look like a polite throat clearing before the main event. The real story, however, isn't in the stock tickers, but on the ground. Listen to Awa Traore, a she-nut picker in a rural cooperative in northern Ivory Coast. Last season, we got 200 CFA francs for a kilo. This season, because the big bags of raw nuts cannot leave the port, the local butter factory is paying 350 CFA. My daughter is staying in school this year. Now, multiply Awa by 2 million rural women across the she belt of West Africa. You begin to see why any politician who dares to reopen the gates to raw exports now risks facing street protests far harsher than any Western corporate lobby. The Western headlines scream about inflation and supply chain collapse, but the deeper wound is strategic. Europe's ambitious goal of 100% EV sales by 2035. Consultants who once championed the target now whisper that 40% compliance would be a victory. Promising American battery startups are shelving their IPOs, starving the entire clean tech sector of vital investment cash. Meanwhile, elite African Union economic memo projects that the continent's collective GDP could rise by an additional 2.3% above its baseline growth in just 5 years, purely from capturing the financial premiums of local processing. A collapse doesn't always look like fireworks and crashing markets. Sometimes it's a quiet calendar full of canceled shifts in one hemisphere and a flurry of job openings in another. This is also a moral reckoning. If you pull up the colonial shipping logs from the port of Matadi or Takoradi from 1890, you will see entries for rubber, gold, and cocoa. For over 130 years, the fundamental recipe never changed. Take it raw, sell it back refined. This coordinated ban does more than just disrupt markets. It holds up a mirror to a 130-year-old economic model. Sovereignty isn't just a flag and an anthem. It's the right to say, we will not be your eternal pit mine. Western policymakers may call it aggressive resource nationalism, but millions of Africans are calling it Tuesday justice. Of course, no plan is bulletproof. The risks ahead are real. Smugglers might try to undercut the embargoes through porous borders. National elites could attempt to hijack the shares of the new smelter projects. And there could be immediate government revenue gaps if the new taxes from refined goods lag behind the old ones from raw exports. Yet every finance communique from the 10 nations has touted the same safeguard: community royalty funds, with profits from the new processing plants audited quarterly and posted online for public viewing. If they can walk that talk, these bans will stick. What we are witnessing is a continent that once lined up solo to sell its treasures now moving in sync. The global supply chain, once thought to be an immutable law of nature, has been flipped faster than a Silicon Valley startup pivot. These export bans are not a footnote in economic history. They are a fundamental line break in a 130-year-old story. Africa isn't asking for a seat at the old small table anymore. It is building a bigger one, refinery by refinery, bean by bean. So the next time you charge your phone, unwrap a piece of chocolate, or see an electric car glide silently by, remember this moment. Remember that the raw materials inside that product now have a new set of gatekeepers. 10 African countries pulled the lever in unison. Western markets are still wobbling from the shock, and the next chapter of the global economy will be written not in London, Brussels, or Washington, but in Lubumbashi, Accra, Harare, and in every village finally tasting the first sweet profits of its own labor.